If we were to assume that money has no substantial value, then the single money price would have no relation to the commodity whose value it was supposed to express, if our observation were restricted to these two factors. One would not know why one object is higher or lower in price, by a definite amount, than another. But if we establish as an absolute presupposition that the sum total of everything saleable is equivalent to the total amount of money, the meaning of total amount to be investigated later, then the price of every single commodity becomes simply the proportion between its value and the total value of commodities, a proportion that is repeated in respect of price and total amount of money. I have to emphasize again that this is not a case of circular reasoning, in the sense that the ability of a definite amount of money to measure the value of a specific commodity is based upon an equation between all money and all commodities which already assumes the measurability of one by the other. The question as to whether every measurement requires the existence of some identical qualities in the object and in that which measures it would then not be relevant to the specific case, but would be absorbed unresolved into the assumptions. A measurement of relative quantities is, however, possible if there is some relation between the absolute quantities, which need not be that of measurability or identity. There is certainly no identity or possibility of measurement between the size of an iron pipe and a given water pressure, but if both are integrated parts of a mechanical system with a specific power output, then it is possible, under known conditions of change in the water pressure, to calculate from changes in the output of power what is the diameter of the pipes in the system. In the same way, commodities and money may not be measurable by each other in general. It is sufficient that both play a part in human life, within the system of men's practical ends, for the quantitative modification of one to become an index of the other. It is not without relevance to this reduction of the significance of every money quantity to a fraction, even if it remains undecided what is the absolute quantity of which it is a part, that the Romans marked their coins, with some well-founded exceptions, according to their relative and not their absolute weight. Thus as signifies only a whole consisting of 12 parts, it may refer to an inheritance just as well as to quantities and weights, to the pound as well as to any part of a pound. The fact that only the relativity of the measure enters consciousness and is effective is not affected by the hypothesis that suggests that in ancient times the as signified a bar of copper of a specific absolute weight. The quantity of effective money, we now have to deal more specifically with the qualifications to the concept of the total quantity of money. It is not because of the immeasurable quantitative difference between all available commodities and all available money that it is impossible to assert that there is as much money to spend as there are commodities for sale. There exists no direct relation of less and more between the two, because there is no common measure for them as there would be for objects that have identical qualities. No quantity of commodities is related to a definite quantity of money, since all the purposes of money could, in principle, be attained by a quantity of money reduced as much as desired. The extent to which this can be achieved in practice, without bringing transactions to a stop, is illustrated by the following recorded fact. Some centuries ago, silver coins existed in Russia of such minute size that it was impossible to take them by hand from the table. They were tipped out of the purse, the amount payable was separated out and both parties proceeded to pick up their share with their tongues and spit it back into their purses. One might say that, whatever the absolute amount of money available, it always remains a lot of money so long as it performs the services of money. All that varies is the quantity of these tokens or pieces in a different respect, namely as material of some kind. Their quantity as money need not be affected. Thus, a direct comparison between all commodities and all money does not allow any conclusion. The lack of relationship between the total amounts of money and of commodities, as denominators of the fractions that express value, results from the fact that the total supply of money is turned over much more quickly than is the total amount of commodities. Nobody will leave large sums of money unused if it can be avoided, and usually it can be avoided. But no merchant can avoid keeping a considerable part of his stock for some time before it can be sold. The difference in the velocity of turnover becomes greater still if one includes those objects that are not offered for sale, but are occasionally saleable if there is a tempting offer. If the amount of money required for the sale of the total supply of goods were calculated on the basis of the prices actually paid for these goods, the estimate would vastly exceed the actual supply of money. From this point of view, it can be stated that there is much less money than commodities and that the proportion between the commodity and its price is not at all equal to the proportion between all commodities and all money, but is considerably smaller than this. However, there are two ways in which we can save our basic proposition. First, we might regard as the total quantity of commodities, that quantity that is actually in the process of being sold. To use an Aristotelian concept, the unsold commodity is merely a possible commodity, which becomes a real commodity only at the moment of sale. Just as money is real money only at the moment when it buys something, i.e., when it exercises the function of money, so the commodity becomes a commodity only when it is sold. Until that time, it is only a possible object for sale, an ideal anticipation. From this standpoint, it is an obvious and analytical statement that there is as much money as there are objects to be sold, including as money, of course, all those money substitutes provided by the banking and credit system. To be sure, the commodities temporarily excluded from the selling process are not without economic effect, and economic life would be changed tremendously if the total supply of commodities were put completely into circulation as is the supply of money. Upon closer scrutiny, the commodity supply in reserve seems to me to have an influence on actual sales only in three ways: on the rate of circulation of money, on the production of the material of money and money equivalents, and on the relation between money expenditure and the reserves. But these factors have already exercised their influence on the actual turnover. The empirical relation between commodity and price has been formed under their influence, and they do not exclude an interpretation of the total quantity of commodities as the actual sales of commodities at a given moment. Secondly, this can also be regarded as a consequence of the fact that the same amount of money, since money is not consumed as commodities are, can affect an unlimited number of transactions, and that it's insignificant.